Hey everybody. So this is one of my favorite talks to give. We're going to cover an introduction to street photography from beginner to advanced topics. This should cover, in my opinion, pretty much everything you need to, really know to get started and to just improve your work on from all levels, from beginner to intermediate to advanced topics. I'm going to show you a lot of my work as well. There are going to be different types of work, color work, black and white work, and then as we get further on, there's going to be more consistent work based on projects and things of that nature. So let's get started. This is one of my favorite photographs. I'll give you, for some of the photographs, a little bit of a talk about them, and some of them I'll just let you see. I don't want to go too into every single photograph, but we're going to talk a lot about looks and eyes and how that can carry a photograph, and you can see that right here. So what is street photography? Street photography is candid photography of life, culture, and human nature. It's a way for us to show our surroundings, how we perceive them, and how we relate to them. We're filtering what we see to find moments that intrigue us. And we'll talk about this later, but it's not just on the street or in cities. I shoot a lot in New York, so a lot of my work, a good portion of it, is kind of the typical street photography that you might think of. But as you'll see later on, a lot of it is different from that as well. And some of my favorite work is done in smaller towns, in suburban areas, in completely different areas. A lot of my favorite work doesn't have people in it. You really can take the sensibility and really show a lot of different aspects of life from all over the place. So that's something that's really important to think about. Street photography in general is sort of a mentality towards shooting and towards what you're looking to capture and portray. This is actually a portrait, but looks kind of like it was, a candid moment. It was a candid moment within the portrait session that, I felt really kind of had a lot of emotion in it. But obviously the interest in there is pretty obvious. And I always like showing these two photographs together. This is a bathroom wall in the middle of a very touristy place in New York. And so it's really fascinating once you start reading all the different messages. Right in the middle it says, kill the rich and eat their young. So I thought, but the look between the two, it has this really similar feel. So first of all, ethics, laws, and don't be a creep. This is all really important stuff to just know before you get started. Street photography is legal in the US and UK for artistic and educational purposes. It's not legal for commercial and advertising purposes without a model release. So you can't use it to advertise a product, but you can put these photographs in books. You can sell prints about them. You can use them to promote a show of your work. Any situation where you might show a piece of your artwork, you can use this type of work. And that's in the US and UK. Different countries have different laws. Some are much stricter than others. So I would certainly look up local laws when you travel or depending on where you live. Now, you always want to be smart and respectful about who you photograph. It's not always worth it to take someone's photo. You don't want to ruin anyone's day. We're doing this because we love people. We like life. We like to photograph life. But the goal is not to really harm people or make them feel bad or anything like that. You'll see some photographs in here that maybe the people might not like the actual photograph of themselves, but I'm just trying to capture an unbiased view of what I see, and my aim is not really to hurt people or make fun of them. I'm trying to really just show what I find interesting and who I find interesting out there. And it's important to know that street photography is a little creepy, but that's okay. It's, some photographers do it much creepier than others. Some are more aggressive than others. The way I like to shoot is, I really don't ever have any problems. I do it respectfully. I get close, but I'm really kind of just, I try to see myself from the vantage point of the people I'm photographing. And I really try to do it in a way that's respectful, but try to not be noticed and try to get candid moments at the same time. But, it's a little creepy what we're doing. We're out there photographing people without their knowledge, and we got to know that. And one of the things that when I work with photographers, it's Some of them will see something interesting and they'll just keep shooting over and over again, the same photograph, the same photograph. It's that I find can get you in trouble. It's maybe not as fair to the person you're photographing. If a scene is, developing, if things are happening, if the moment isn't quite there yet and you need to wait for it to get there, then certainly, wait, in kind of a respectful way to take the photograph. But you don't want to keep clicking and keep shooting and over and over and over again. That just can get uncomfortable for everyone involved. So it's really something to keep in mind when you're talking about just how to respectfully photograph your subjects. Once you get the photograph, move on, unless you see other things happening that might improve it. I often find that when I take a bunch of photographs of someone, it's either usually the first photograph or the last photograph that are the best ones. Here's a photograph where what really worked was just waiting for that moment where this guy's name is Jerry Delacus, where Jerry just looked up and made eye contact. It took it slightly out of the candid moment, but I captured it before, the expression on his face really changed. So it is definitely a candid moment, even though he's noticing us and looking at us. So the major tips. These are tips that I think if you can do these, it will take you a good portion of the way towards getting really good quality photographs in tough environments, in a tough genre. The first thing is to linger and let your subjects come to you. I love street photography because I love walking and I love exploring and I love getting lost, and I do a ton of walking. But I think really just when you see a good place, you get a feeling that there might be a good photograph somewhere, stop and wait and hang out for a while and let things happen around you. What that does is it allows you to give time to an area for the great moments to happen. And it also allows, because you're standing there, it becomes your space. So when your subjects, when you see the most interesting subject that you've seen, they'll be coming towards you and coming into your space. So it gives you time to, see them ahead of time, get your camera ready, get ready. And it makes it a little bit more comfortable for them because you're not hopping into their space. They're kind of entering yours and you already have your camera set up. So it's also very easy to kind of, make it seem like you're just photographing the background as well. The camera snap, I always find, is an important thing. A lot of photographers, most photographers that I've seen, what they naturally do is they take a photograph, and right after they take the photograph, they take the camera away from their eye, even if only for a split second. It's kind of an instinctive thing. And what that does is that's the only way that lets your subject know that you've actually taken a photograph. If they see you do that, it's like, oh, clearly that person just took a photograph. So if you don't do that, it just looks like you're waiting for them to get out of the way to shoot something behind them. So I'll often take the photograph and I'll keep the camera in my eye as if I don't notice the subject, and I'll let them, just head through. Keep your camera up. It's if you keep your camera down or at your side and it's not ready to go, that can really be hard for capturing a fast-moving subject. Some of the best moments, particularly in busy areas, but all over, they just happen when they happen, and they're split-second moments. And especially if you're uncomfortable, photographing a subject, taking that camera from your side and really taking it up and putting it to your eye is a big moment. That is really noticeable. If you're walking around with your camera up, I tend to kind of, keep my camera in my hand, and I have a way of just holding it that is comfortable. And so when the moment happens, I only have to really put the camera up a small distance towards my eye. It's already pretty close to where I need it to be for photography. And that allows me to take quick shots. It allows me to be a little bit more inconspicuous when I take the moments, and I feel a lot more comfortable doing that. This being said, it's much easier to do with a small mirrorless camera and a prime lens. I shoot a ton like this with a Fuji X100 that's tiny and the built-in 35 millimeter lens or a 50 millimeter lens. And so it's light, so I can do that. With a SLR, which I have shot this type of work with an SLR for a long time, it's heavier, so you can't keep the camera up as much. But when you start to notice something happening or you're in an area where you want to take photographs, then bring your camera up and keep it ready to go. And you'll notice that you'll when the moment happens, you will be much more ready. An important thing is how you look when you're photographing. A lot of people when they're starting are really nervous. Even if you've been photographing this type of work for a long time, you still get nervous in times, and maybe it's a subject you want to photograph, but you don't necessarily feel comfortable, and that happens all the time. But you want to really look the part that you're not doing anything wrong, because we're not. We're doing this because we like our subjects, and so I wrote smile here, but it's smile, just keep a happy look, make it seem like you belong in that area and you're confident in what you're doing. And your subjects will read off that and ignore you as much as they can. If they feel like you feel like you're doing an okay thing, then they're not going to notice you as much. If you're slinking in the corner with a long zoom lens and you look really nervous and you're kind of taking super, super sneaky, then they're actually going to notice you much more. I always find when I get right in the middle of a street or right in the middle of an action and I'm just photographing confidently and I look happy, that's when people kind of ignore me the most and just let me be. And it's really, really interesting to see how that works. Similar to the linger tip, the first tip, there are a lot of fast walkers out there. Sometimes I can be like that as well. It's important to just slow down when you can. Even if you're in an area where you're, think there's no photographs, there are photographs everywhere. You just want to always keep looking and always keep hopeful that the next best photograph of your life is around the corner. And walking slow will really help you to do that. It allows you to spend more energy thinking about the photographs, looking around, and you'll notice more than if you're just walking fast, waiting to get to that next amazing spot. Because when you do that, when you're looking for the next amazing spot, you tend not to find as many amazing spots. When you're just walking slow and giving every single area an equal chance, I find that you tend to really find more amazing spots that you might have overlooked if you were just kind of going from place to place. And one of the most important tips for me is to do a slight bit of acting. It's very subtle. Some people go overboard with this. I just make it look like I'm a photographer capturing the background, that I don't notice my subjects. If you look right at your subjects and you notice them, they're going to notice you back, and it's going to take them out of their moment. And we want candid moments. We want them to be in their own world. So I just kind of play the part that, maybe I'm looking at something behind them. Maybe I'm looking up a little bit or at a building or something like that. Often, with the small camera, I'll just shoot so quickly. Something happens, I shoot it and I move on. It's just so fast that nobody notices. But there are a lot of moments where I need to just do a little bit of acting. And so I'll kind of, maybe saunter into place slowly, make it look like I'm looking around at the backgrounds and they just kind of happen to be there. And if you do that the right way, you act confident about what you're doing, you kind of put all these tips together, you can really photograph it and get close and in most situations without having a problem. It's probably been about 5 years since someone stopped me and asked what I was doing, a really long time. And I shoot all the time, every other day. And in very different environments, busy areas in New York, quiet areas near where I live, in Brooklyn. And it's based on how I carry myself. Early on that maybe wasn't the case, but over time I've developed a way that just makes it look like I'm doing something pleasant. I'm not annoying people, and they just let me be. This is one of those moments where he looked down at the kind of last second, and I saw this, great smiley face on the top of his hat. And if I did not have my camera up and ready to go, and it was pre-focused and everything, I wouldn't have been able to get this photograph. There are a few photographs like that I'm going to show you throughout this presentation. There are some that I set everything up. There's some that I had time to notice it and get in place. But there are a lot where just I had a split second to take it, and I just went for it, and then just said, please make sure that worked. And as I look at the back of the camera to make sure it worked. And sometimes it does work, sometimes it doesn't. Now, especially when you're starting out, fear is one of the hardest things to overcome. I find that's the biggest hump, is the fear and the technical stuff at first. And once you get over that, then the sky's the limit for figuring out what's interesting. And really, that's the hardest part at the beginning. And it doesn't have to be that bad. So, if you as long you want to pick the right subjects, you want to stay away from photographing people who you might get really angry, anyone who looks like they have any sort of anger issues or anything like that. It's not always worth it to take the photograph. So that's an important thing, to just be a little street smart, if you know what I mean. But getting stopped by people when they ask what you're doing, it's kind of actually important for that to happen a few times, because once you talk to them and talk your way out of a few of those situations, it makes you a lot more comfortable when you're shooting. And what I do is, in the past when people stop me, I would always say, I'd be honest. I'd say, "Oh yeah, I'm a photographer. I'm doing a project on the people of New York and the fascinating streets." And flattery is great. I would, say something like I thought you looked amazing. I thought you looked really interesting. When you flatter someone, then what can they say? I'd give them a card. I offer to send them the photograph. A couple times people seemed uncomfortable and said, "Hey, can you delete my photograph?" And while you legally don't have to do that, it's really, I think the right thing to do if they seem uncomfortable and they ask you. If it's the best photograph of your life, you could just run away, but it's never the best photograph of your life when someone asks you to stop and delete it. But it's usually a more pleasant encounter, or occasionally they'll just seem a little weirded out at first, and then they'll say, "Okay, sure," and move on. Yeah, it's not that bad to be stopped by people. Street portraits are really an important thing to get you comfortable with street photography. Stopping people on the street, asking them, can I take your photograph? I think you look really interesting. I'm just doing a project on interesting people in the area." And you'll notice that you'll make a lot of people's days. Most people tend to say yes unless they're in a rush or doing something, or they don't think they look their best at the time. And so this will get you comfortable, certainly. And it'll just allow you to feel like what you're doing isn't quite a bad thing at all. Now, street portraits, they're not necessarily candid. The technical term of street photography, maybe street portraits don't necessarily go within that. But in the genre of street photography, street portraits can be a very important part of it. Any project or book, often portraits will add a really great dimension to it. And so when you take portraits, you want to make sure they look more like themselves. You don't want people to do fake smiles and stiff poses. So I always try to do something to make them, tell them, just look like you're looking like, you don't have to have a smile on your face. Just, look normal, look natural. And when you give them that direction, it gives them the opportunity to think about it and just look like themselves. So I find that's a really important thing to do for street portraits. As we mentioned with lingering, picking a spot and waiting is incredibly important. But, really for overcoming fear, it's so much easier when you're just in a busy place or even not busy place and your subjects are coming to you and you have the camera up and you're shooting. And that's an easy way to get comfortable. It's harder and it takes a little bit more time when you're on a quiet street and there's someone that you want to photograph halfway down the street and you're the only person there. How do you do that? And you want to get it to be a candid shot. That's the tougher stuff that you can kind of work towards. But at the beginning, go somewhere busy, just hang out in the middle of the action, keep your camera up, make it look like you're looking at the background, and you'll notice that people won't notice you. It's a great way to get kind of over your initial fear of this type of photography. Repetition is one of the most important things to this genre. It's so much like a sport. Street photography is very difficult because there's, the hand-eye coordination, there's all these elements that you have to get right. And you get rusty after a while. You may be nervous if you haven't shot for a while. You may not feel your camera right. It takes a little time. And so I think just going out, no matter where you are, in the busiest areas, in the quietest areas, walking down your block, just go out and photograph over and over and over again. And this repetition is going to not only train your eye, but it's going to, train your hand-eye coordination, your use of the camera. And I think that's the most important key towards becoming a good street photographer. It's just you can, go through this presentation and do everything in here, but nothing, all of those tips together won't do you anything more than just going out every day and photographing, or every other day, or every week, just something consistently, even in short periods of time. Now, I'm a big proponent that you can do street photography with any camera, with an iPhone, you name it, the big SLR with a zoom lens. You can certainly do it. I did it for a while with those that type of equipment. But there's something to be said. And actually, these days I do use a big camera, which I'll talk about for certain types of street photography. But there is something to be said for a small camera with a small prime lens. Light camera, light lens, fixed lens, so you're used to it. What that does is it really gets you used to what you're photographing. You start to see as the lens sees, and it makes you really fast and spontaneous. Spontaneity, we'll talk about, is one of the keys to this genre. And the zooming of zoom lenses tends to slow you down, and it doesn't get you so in sync with what the camera's going to see. When you have a prime lens, you get so used to it. It really will do a lot for your photography. But just, for overcoming fear, having a prime lens and a small camera will allow you to feel like you blend in more and you're not as noticeable. I just read a funny tweet from someone in, where was it? I don't know, maybe it was like Uzbekistan, and he said, actually the opposite. He said, here, people like big things. So they take you, when you have a big camera, they take you much more seriously than a small camera. So if you go around and you're photographing with a big camera, they'll let you be more than with a small camera. But in many places, I think the opposite is, just for taking candid shots, a small camera and a prime lens will be beneficial in a lot of situations. Here's another fast one where I had the camera pre-focused and up, and just in a busy crowd, suddenly I saw this young woman and this look in her face. Just reminded me so much of the look in the Mona Lisa, actually. So I found that really fascinating. So light, it's always a really important thing to have in the back of your head. I'm always looking for content first, interesting looks in people's faces, things like that. But in the back of my head, light is always there. It's always something not necessarily always actively, but it's definitely in the side of my mind, if you know what I mean. So you want to think about how strong is the light. Is it a sunny day? Is there direct contrasty light where there's bright light and harsh and dark shadows? Is it an overcast day? What direction is the light coming from? Is it hitting your subject and making that subject, very colorful and well exposed? Or is the light coming from behind them and making them a little dark and hazy and having this kind of interesting look, but you don't necessarily have that pop that you have when the sun is hitting them directly? How strong is the contrast? And is your main subject in the highlight or shadows? Definitely can make or break a photograph. Is the light making interesting patterns that can make for a really, really interesting background? Where is the light reflecting? One of the best things about New York, big avenues, is that the sun hits off the bright concrete and reflects into people's faces. So you can have the sun behind someone, but they still have this incredible glow, which it just, in the right situations, can look absolutely amazing and make your photograph. And night is an amazing time to shoot street photography, but it is a little bit more difficult because of how dark it is. And so, what I'll do is I will make sure to find the light sources, and I'll place myself in between myself and the light source. And that will allow me to photograph anything kind of almost in the same way as during the day, with not as good settings. But once you're staying in an area with the lights and waiting for your subjects to enter, you can really just take an incredible bunch of photographs in tough lighting situations. So, I'll stand right next to shop windows that are bright, near lampposts. I'll look at where the light is illuminating and then wait for the subject to cross paths with it. Here's one where I was just waiting for someone to go through this stream of light. This one, I had to wait for a taxi or a car to drive by. It turned out to be a taxi, and just illuminate the foreground with the lights. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to get it lit like this. Here's one where I don't think it would have been very interesting without the interesting light. Now, camera settings. The way I like to set my camera is to make the camera work for me. There's so much stuff going on that if you have to constantly change your camera, think about your settings, it's just going to slow you down and take away the most important aspect, which is looking at the moment and waiting for the moment to happen. So you can shoot street photography in shutter priority, aperture priority, manual. If you know what you're doing, those all work really well. And there are fantastic street photographers who use each of the settings. There are some photographers who use auto and it works. They still get a lot of good photographs. I think are the ideal settings. Priority. I like to set my depth of field to know what I'm getting. And then letting the camera do some of the work, because you're often photographing in different light sources. You're going from shadow to sun to, maybe into a shop window or right to a bright area. And if you have to change your manual settings every time you do that, it's a lot. And it's a lot to do that and to actually focus on what you're photographing and just to, enjoy the walk and relax. So I prefer the camera to do a little bit of the work there. And I like aperture priority because it gives you a little bit more control of your aperture. Shutter priority is great as well. If you know what you're doing, you can definitely use it to the same endpoint. But I prefer aperture. You want to have, in my opinion, a shutter speed whenever possible of 250th of a second or faster. That's going to freeze your motion in your subjects. The faster, obviously, will freeze faster motion, but I find 250th is enough for whatever you need. At night, when it gets dark and you may not have the ability to quite get to 250, 1/80th, 1/125th, even 1/80th of a second can be totally fine. A little blur in those situations isn't the worst thing in the world, and a lot of your photographs will still be perfectly sharp with those settings. So, I think one thing that a lot of people know this now, but there previously was such a emphasis towards always having the lowest ISO possible. The less grain will be sharper photographs and higher quality. But these days, digital cameras are so incredible with their high ISOs that the teaching has flipped almost, especially for street photography. These cameras can do incredible work at ISO 1600, 3200, even 6400. They may be grainy, but the grain actually looks much more pleasing than it used to be. And because we're going to want different settings. We might want more depth of field, a faster shutter speed. We're going to want the right settings for the aperture and shutter. And the only thing that can give is the ISO. And so you're going to find if you shoot with, a higher ISO than you're normally comfortable with, you're going to come back with much higher quality photographs a lot of the time. So typically when I'm on a sunny day where I'm shooting both sunny and shady sides of the street, I'm typically around ISO 800. When it's maybe an overcast or dark day, or the sun is just starting to get a little darker, I'm usually at ISO 1600, and then dusk and evening I'm at 32, then to 6400. I typically, the only time I'd be at ISO 200 or 400 would be if I'm just staying in the sun for a very long time, if I'm shooting on the beach. A place like New York, there's usually like a lot of tall buildings, so there's, even on the sunniest of days, there's a lot, half or more always of what you're photographing will be in the shade no matter what. Whereas if you're maybe in a town or shooting in a suburban area where there's only one-story buildings and it's a sunny day and everything's in the sun, then you wouldn't have to be at ISO 800. You could be at 400 or 200. But just don't be afraid of raising it up when you need to. I'd much rather a high ISO and a better aperture or a better shutter speed. The final thing, which I think is very important to think about, is whether you want to use a large depth of field or a small depth of field with your aperture. I generally start off shooting trying to get about f8, which is a nice middle ground. It allows enough range, depth of field, especially when you use wider angle lenses such as a 35 or a 50 millimeter. And the reason I like this is because it will help you not screw up the sharpness of your shots. Because if you miss, often you're going to miss the focus a little bit, sometimes a lot, and you can't save it, but often it's a little bit. And if you're shooting at a really low aperture, like a 2.8 or a 4, that can really screw up the shot because then the sharpness will not be there. But if you're shooting at f8, you can save a lot of photographs where you miss the sharpness slightly, and it will still look wonderful. So, I just don't want to put my camera in a position to screw up what might be the best moment or photograph that I've taken. I want when those moments happen, I want everything to be in position to give me the best possible chance to capture it. I love the look. Some photographers shoot all the time this type of work at f2.8 with a lot of, bokeh and things like that. And I love that look from some photographers, but I'm not willing to do that and risk screwing up those very interesting moments. So, typically it's f8. As it gets darker, then I'll have to go to f5.6 and f4. And at night, you have no choice but to shoot at f2.8 or 2. But yeah, f8, sometimes f11 if I'm shooting on the beach or in a bright sunny day. This is another moment where it just happened so fast that having my settings, set and fast shutter speed and everything really allowed me to capture this moment. The guy, after, he blew that smoke throughout his car, noticed me and looked at me and said, he laughed and he said, don't show my mama. So I thought that was a funny moment, but another photograph that I wouldn't have gotten if I wasn't all ready to take it. Here's a moment taken on Canal Street, which is a very, very busy street. It's just, it's often hard to get really crowded areas where you have, you show so many different subjects that you can see. And really having the camera, set and a decent depth of field and everything like that allowed me to kind of get an image where so much of the photograph is sharp and you can see all the subjects. It's a difficult image to get. So what makes a photograph interesting? What makes an interesting photograph? I have no idea. It's an incredibly broad question that's extremely hard to answer. And when you start to figure out what you find interesting, what the consistencies in your work, what you like to photograph, that's when you're going to get on the path towards becoming a good street photographer. It's a process, but it's one that takes a lot of thinking from you and a lot of looking at your work and a lot of looking at the work of other photographers until you start to notice that the stuff that really draws you in. For me, it's if you've seen The Americans by Robert Frank, he loved to shoot different icons of Americana. He loved the jukebox, the American flag. These days, I find, objects of our day, cultural objects, to be the coffee cup, the shopping bag, the iPhone or cell phone, the headphones. So I tend to photograph a lot of these things. I try, they're so ubiquitous that, you have to have a really good photograph when you get them. But it's a conscious element of a lot of my photographs, particularly so because it's everywhere. New York used to be a place where you would, it still is, but one of the beauties of it is just walking down the street and not knowing who you're going to come across and talk to and from any background, any place. And those are the special moments that you have. But a lot of people now walk through New York with huge headphones on, just completely disconnected from the background, disconnected from the special moments, things like that. And I'll show you a project that kind of covers a broad view where that's part of it. But it's definitely something that I pay attention to when I'm walking around. Now, here are some things that I think can help to make a photograph interesting. Always things to think about. The first one is content and story. Street photography photographs, good ones, often have just some sort of feeling. It could be a more obvious idea or a subtle one or something that you can't quite put your finger on, but you find it really to make you think. Content and story is incredibly important to make a really powerful photograph. Emotion and gesture, that's one of the first things I look at. The first photograph I showed you, the looks in the eyes. Really, you're often looking for someone who is wearing their emotions on their sleeve, so to speak, where you can see what they're feeling. That's a way to just bring that feeling out in your viewers. So I often, when I'm looking around, I look at the eyes first. I look at the gestures in the body, how they're standing. The way a person stands can really carry a photograph as well. And I would rather have the most plainly dressed, indescript person with a really powerful look on their face, powerful emotion, than the flashiest, most colorful person that it's just walking down the street. I think that the emotion is really something that can carry a photograph much further. And street photographs are a mixture between content and form. So you want the photograph to be really interesting, but you also, of course, want it to look as good as possible. So the foreground, the forefront of what I'm looking for is the motion and the content, and in the back of my head, it's the lights, color, tone, composition. Bringing all that together to create a complete photograph. So over time, you'll notice you start to, just subconsciously, instinctively, you do think about all that stuff at the same time, even with these quick moments. As I mentioned with the content and story, looking beneath the surface, having a little bit of some sort of non-obvious or obvious message that is there. Consistency. Your photographs don't always have to be consistent, of course not, but street photography works really well in projects and books, and taking some of the consistent photographs out and showing them together in interesting sequences, which make them all kind of work off each other and play off each other. So I find telling a story through multiple photographs works really well, and you can have different stories that are completely different, but consistency in each type of thing that you're doing, I think, can be very important. And interpretation and ambiguity. I sort of mentioned this in some of the others, but creating a photograph that allows someone to interpret it in their kind of own way, have it just be subtle enough where maybe if, say, they put it on their wall and they could feel different about it depending on how they're feeling that day, something that can grow with a person over time. I think there was like 30 something devices in this one photograph. Now, imperfection, that's something I think is very important to really think about. Particularly photographers who come from a landscape background tend to be, some of them tend to be perfectionists. They think about, they want everything to be straight and everything in place and, everything perfect. And that really works well for landscape photography. And it's a good thing to have because you're thinking about things in the right way. But street photography is really an imperfect form of photography. It celebrates the imperfect. So I'll read it off of here. A street photograph does not have to be perfect to be good. The nature of a good street photograph gives us a glimpse into a slice of reality, and perfection can ruin this feeling of realness because life isn't perfect. This is why grain, angled horizons, cut off people, or slight out of focus or motion blur are all very common in street photography and celebrated. Sometimes the imperfections will ruin a photograph, but other times they will make it that much better. Really, we're celebrating special moments, interesting moments, unique moments, and having something that's not quite perfect is only in many situations going to enhance that feeling. Some situations it will ruin it, but it really depends on the photograph. So, if you think about Gary Winogrand, a significant percentage of his photographs were shot askew, a little bit off kilter. And, it so much so that it seemed like he was doing it on purpose. I mean, he probably was. It was probably a mixture of, instinctively how he shot, but how he wanted to shoot. And if you see in those moments, it's just the consistency of that, it just feels like, we're looking at these special moments that shouldn't have been captured, that he, pulled out of life. And so it's just something to think about. For those of you who are perfectionists, you want to use that to your advantage to really think about all the details of the photographs. But go with your gut, be spontaneous and fast when you need to be, and don't sweat the small stuff too much. Give yourself a little bit more credit when you have an interesting moment, that certain things won't ruin it. Here's a butt selfie, someone taking a selfie of their butt. You see just harsh, crazy lighting here, blown out and everything, but it just adds to the look. I find the blur here to actually make it even more, interesting. That cigarette looks almost ethereal and kind of brings you to that powerful look in her face. Combining elements, that's a thing that I think it's really important to stress because a lot of photographers, especially in this genre, have what I call tunnel vision. They will notice a subject and they'll zoom right in or get right in and they'll just photograph that. And often that's the right thing to do. But You do want to have an awareness of the background and other subjects that might be coming in, and you often want to think about maybe combining different subjects and elements. And so, it's important to see a great subject and notice them, and often you just take it right when you see it. But you want to use that peripheral vision and that awareness of your surroundings to try to really see the background and see the other elements and see and to get the shot in the best way possible. And you'll find that you'll capture some incredible moments that way. Here's one. This was actually a portrait that I was doing of this woman, and I kind of waited for her to think I wasn't photographing, so she'd get in her own world. And I was lucky to have this other young woman with a bunch of coffee cups walking by, and it kind of really completed the feeling and the look. When I do workshops, one of the things I do is I set people out with a contest to see who can photograph the most coffee cups all together. And I think the record was someone got 8 once. But it's of cultural objects, coffee cups is something as I mentioned, I always look for. This was taken at Occupy Wall Street, and I just found the combination of the two really brought the photograph out. And setting a stage. So setting a stage is something that is important to know about, but it's just as important to be careful of overdoing it. So when you find a moment that's really interesting, a background that's really interesting, that's your stage. And often you might want a subject to come into that to improve the photograph. Finding a great area and waiting for the great subject can create some incredible photographs. The thing to be careful about is often that background is the photograph. Often that background is interesting that no person coming in is going to make that photograph better, and will often just make it worse, make it seem more staged and planned. If you have a great background, the subject that needs to come in to hold up to the background has to be just as interesting, if not more so. So you want to make sure to have the right subject that can hold up to the background, and you want to make sure that having any random person walk through a photograph is not going to suddenly make it a street photograph. It's a street photograph because it's an interesting photograph, and just a background can be it. That being said, you see a few of these, where the background's incredible and the moment of the subjects just made it. I had been. I'm really interested in bike messengers. It's one of the most dangerous jobs in New York, if not the most dangerous. And also, the classic steam. Trying to get a shot of that wasn't too cheesy. And I had spent something like I don't know, 8 or 10 years photographing steam and bike messengers, and never getting a photograph that I really liked, that I thought was amazing. And then I got this with both steam and bike messengers in the same photograph. And after that, I never have to take a photograph of a bike messenger or steam again. So it's very freeing, after finally getting this photograph. Here's one where I think it's interesting. So, I found this great background here, which I love, and I love this photograph on its own. And so, but I did wait, and I waited for the right subject to kind of come in and sit. And because I was waiting and I had my camera up and I was, making it look like I was hanging out, just looking around, he really didn't give me the time of day, let me be. And so, I was allowed to, I was able to capture these really candid moments and, all different types of moments. And I want you to see them because it's like, which, moment is the most interesting shot. Of my favorites, I like them all for different reasons. I think this one, the third one, and the first one are the two that I like the most, depending on the situation. But the first one with just this background, I think, is just so interesting on its own that it might not even need the subject. It's it's kind of it's a tough one. They all have their own pluses and minuses to them. Now, color or black and white is it's a really important thing to think about, and it's going to be a big part of your work, figuring out whether you want your work to be color or black and white. The first thing is it's obviously personal preference, what you choose. It's very important for consistency, particularly for projects. And that doesn't mean that you have to only photograph in black and white or color. I like to photograph in both, and but I do different projects in black and white and different projects in color. A lot of my Manhattan work with a small camera, and those projects are shown in black and white. Yeah, I like to emphasize the classic, have that classic feeling, to mix it with the modern. I find that to be really interesting. But then my Brooklyn work, where I'm going to quieter, more suburban areas, with a lot more subtlety, I really prefer to photograph those in color. So you can, the consistency in your work overall is going to be shown over time due to your sensibility. That sensibility is going to shine through. But within projects, the consistency, really, black and white or color is often the way to go. There are photographers who have done projects where they've shown both black and white and color images, and when they pull it off, it's incredible, but it's very hard to pull off. Now, black and white has a timeless quality to it, which is really important to think about, whereas color can feel more modern. But as I mentioned, when you photograph something that's really modern and stark and new, showing it in black and white, can make it feel both modern and historic at the same time. So it takes you out of that modern moment and enhances it at the same time. And so that's why I like to photograph a lot of the shopping areas and the new stuff in black and white. Faces really can show more, or just are more obvious in black and white. It reduces all the color distractions, so that when you have great faces and you show a shot in black and white, your eyes are going to go right to the faces. Whereas often in color, it might go to some other place first. And as I just mentioned, color distractions. If there's a shot with a lot of different color distractions, or maybe one orange cone that kind of ruins the moment, just turn it to black and white, and you can save the photograph. Here's one where I thought there was just this disconnect between this muted colors and her stiff look in her face and hand, and her iPhone with this flowing, relaxed woman in the red dress. I thought that was really interesting. Here's one where this just kid was just doing these push-ups. It was just amazing, but I waited for him to look up and give me eye contact, and I thought that was what made the photograph. This one, I love this photograph in color. It's obviously better in color than it would be in black and white, but the project that it's for is a black and white project, and so I had to show it in black and white to fit in. And it's still a great image in black and white, but you have to make sacrifices when you need to make them. Now, street photography without people. It's really important, I think, to shoot this type of work and have some of your photographs be without people. A lot of people who are shooting street photography and asking for advice and send me their photographs, they only send photographs with people. And it's great to see those, but it's like I also want to see the background. I want to see the environment. I want to see a variety to your photography. So you should really focus some of your attention on photographs that don't have people in them. This really, for me, gives that domineering feeling from some of the architecture and that you get from the city. So that was, one of the purposes for this photograph. When you feel kind of locked in this, busy city, this feels like almost like a jail to me. And so that's another feeling I wanted to kind of portray. This is the new Hudson Yards, which is just the most awful new luxury neighborhood of just 10 glass luxury buildings built overnight. And the architecture is fascinating because it's sleek and new, but it's just all glass, and it's very ugly. But like other architecture, you have something to lock onto and see. This is just it feels soulless. There's nothing. There's so much going on here, but there's nothing to see. There's nothing that your eyes lock onto, and that kind of says more about other things than just the architecture as well. So that's one of the reasons for taking this photograph. This when you talk about New York being such a unique place, over time it's certain areas, it's starting to look like other big cities are having the same look and the same feel and the same formula to how they're developing, And so this is the side of I think it was a Harry Winston jewelry store, and I just found the list of cities there to be kind of really interesting from when you think about it in that perspective. Now, a really important thing to think about is just to use your eyes instead of the viewfinder. All the work is really should be done with your eyes before you put your head in the camera. And so I do, hip shoot and, shoot from below my face often when I need to. When I can, I always use the viewfinder. But I make sure that I'm looking around with my eyes and I'm looking for moments with my eyes. And it's almost like when I used to, play basketball, when I was younger, coaches would, some coaches would, the first few practices, they wouldn't even give you a basketball. They would just, run you or, go through plays or go through different things so that you wouldn't be distracted by the basketball. Similarly, just walking around and looking for moments. Often when I leave my camera behind for some reason, that's when I see the most interesting moments because I'm actually just relaxed and looking around. And so I think just using your eyes to see the moment or see the potential for the moment before you actually take the camera to your eye is one of the most important things that you can do. Now, zone focusing. Zone focusing is an advanced thing that if I was to be standing with you with my camera, it's much easier to show than just talking about it here. But I think I can do a good job here as well. Zone focusing is the act of turning your camera to manual focus, not having the autofocus on, and pre-focusing your camera to a certain distance. Usually I do it about 8 feet to 10 feet away, somewhere in that range. And that's the range that often most of my people photographs are taken around, somewhere in that general range, maybe a little bit different. And I, whenever possible, I'll do it sometimes at night or with f4 or f2.8 with a shallow depth of field, and it's much harder. But, typically I do it with a wide angle lens and like an f8 so that I have I shoot more zone focusing with a 35 millimeter than a 50 millimeter because more of your scene is in focus that way. And so if you're shooting, with a 35 millimeter lens at f8 and you're pre-focused, to say 9 feet away, everything from say 5 feet to 15 feet is going to be pretty in focus. Obviously, as you get closer to 9 feet, it's going to be more and more in focus. But that frees you up because if you know everything from 5 feet to 15 feet is going to be pretty in focus, you don't really have to focus anymore. You're already focused. So you just have to see the moment and shoot. And so that added time, that added split second, that added freedom will allow you to capture a certain type of spontaneous moment that is much harder to get when you autofocus or do a different type of focusing. I probably autofocus with the center spot about half of the time, and I zone focus half of the time, depending on how I'm feeling, depending on what I'm shooting, and depending on what lens I'm using. Zone focusing, it's kind of hard at first. The first few days that you do it, you'll find that you're going to get, kind of screw it up. You may hit the focus and think you're shooting it at 9 feet away, but you may knock it and shoot it 4 or 5 feet by accident and screw up a whole bunch of photographs. You constantly kind of have to look to make sure you're at that distance and to get used to photographing people in that range. And there's some photographs that you just kind of miss because you're not focused at the right amount. But the autofocus switch is right there. So if you're zone focusing and suddenly there's some great, amazing moment that's not moving and you have time, just flip the autofocus on and take the shot and go back to zone focusing after. It doesn't mean you can't autofocus and you can't flip to autofocus really quickly. But yeah, so I think it's, if you look at some of my very spontaneous photographs that are really sharp, I mean, the reason I was able to capture them was because I was on manual focus at a certain distance, and it sped me up so much that I was able to capture that super fast moment. Here's a shot in a crowded, busy city street where two people bumped into each other, and the man just started yelling at the woman, and it happened like on the side of me in just such a split second, and I was pre-focused at right at that distance, and so I was able to capture it. With autofocusing, it would have been tough to quickly capture, there's, especially if I was centered, my autofocus would have been right here. So I would have had to lock onto her, then recompose. So I either would have screwed up the shot or I wouldn't have been able to capture it right at the moment where he was screaming at her right after they bumped into each other. There's a famous Robert Frank photograph from Canal Street. This is also on Canal Street, with just an incredible crowd of people. It's just the most wonderful crowd photograph I've ever seen. And so, I've always been trying to capture a crowd photograph that I thought was amazing. And, I have a couple that I like after, decades of trying to get, images like this. But this one I pre-focused. I loved the background. You had kind of the little Frankfurter stand. You had the Chrysler Building here, just this beautiful architecture. And it's just such a busy street with people coming from all different directions, a diverse crowd. It's the corner of Canal Street and Broadway. It's an absolutely wonderful place to photograph. But I pre-focused it to something like, maybe 9 or 10 feet. And this allowed me to just wait there and watch, my periphery and see when people are coming and take a lot of photographs. And really, it allowed me to, definitely get lucky. But, I really kind of saw it happening at the same time. But when you see it happening, it doesn't, 99.99% of the time, it's not going to come out like this. But because I was pre-focused, I was able to really kind of get all these characters, people in the right position. How will an image age? That's just a really important thing to think about, to take yourself out of the modern moment. There's a lot of stuff that we take for granted right now. We just think this stuff is normal. And so what if that stuff wasn't normal? I mean, you got to think about what's going to age well, what's going to be interesting, and try not to take things for granted. It's hard to figure out what that stuff is, but when your mind is thinking in that way, you're going to start to notice a whole world of things that are that just stand out that might not have before. There's so many shots of people staring at cell phones. It's such an interesting thing and such a thing to our time right now. But because it's so ubiquitous, to get a good shot, you have to get a really good shot of people staring at their cell phones. Just the normal ones of them staring, I think don't cut it. So it's an interesting type of photograph to take, but you got to make sure it's really good. Here's one, it's just a shot of graffiti. Someone else's graffiti, but the message there, it's kind of something that if you look at the content of a lot of the black and white photographs that I've been seeing, I think really kind of shows an aspect and says a message that I want to include as well in that. Now, themes and projects. There are some photographers who don't really think in terms of themes and projects. They just photograph and they show their best work, and that's a great way to do it. There are a lot of photographers, though, that really think in themes and projects, or over time they develop their work into themes and projects. And I think that's one of the really amazing art forms in this genre. I think street photography books are really an incredible thing to look at and collect and go through. Street photography really shines in books. Book is the book and the project, I think, is the best possible way to help this type of work shine. And as I talked about, projects and themes, it's good to have them consistent in some way, particularly color, black and white in format. Yeah, I like to not crop to different formats, to have like a really wide shot and a square shot, and I like to have them the same format, and so I like consistencies in that way. How to develop a project? The first step is to really get comfortable with the type of shooting. Get yourself technically good, shoot a lot. And there's two ways. There are photographers who think about the project ahead of time, and then they go out and shoot it. And there are other photographers who just shoot, and they go out and shoot. And then they look through their work and they start to notice the consistencies and they start to notice the ideas. And then slowly they develop that idea and it morphs and changes. And it may morph over years or even a decade. I do a little bit of both. So one of my main projects called Luck City is capturing the changing nature of New York as it becomes safer and more luxurified and gentrified, and just how that special nature of it is kind of becoming more formulaic, and there's more consumption, and people that are more lonely and disconnected and stressed, and yada yada. That's the type of stuff that I'm really fascinated with in the city, and brought together in that project. But that project, I started shooting it over a decade ago, somewhere around there, and definitely had the overall kind of idea somewhat in the back of my mind. But it took me 5 years to really start to see what I had, and say, oh, I have a project here, and to put words to it. And then as I kept figuring out more and more what I was shooting, I got better and better photographs, because I knew what to look for. I knew what it was missing. And so that's a great thing to do. But you can do a project based on idea. You can do a project, a lot of it is about yourself. What emotion in yourself do you want to, find in the real world, and show to people. And a lot can be on an area. You can just go pick an area near where you live that you frequent a lot, and just try to tell the story of that area as well. That's a great way to just do a project. It's a great way to do a first project. It's a great way to do a project at any point. Right here, if you notice, it says talk to me because I'm lonely. These are all from the project Lux City. Now, editing and consistency. When I said, repetition and shooting a lot is the number one key for street photography, the other key is the work that you do when you're editing. I really like to put my photographs into different collections based on projects and ideas that I have. And, I play around. I love to edit. I love to see what I'm shooting. And over time, that's where I really kind of think about what it is I'm creating and putting together. When I'm shooting, I like to just have fun and walk around and shoot. When I'm editing is when I try to do the hard work of thinking about what I'm actually shooting and where I should go and what I'm missing. And it allows me, when I'm shooting, to still be relaxed and spontaneous and enjoy the walk, but it allows me to notice more, because, I've done that work when I'm editing. One of the things I've been trying to get for a long time is just a powerful photograph of someone with, vape smoking. And it was a hard one to get something that like stood out. You saw one before that I thought was really great as well. But those are the only two that I've been able to get that really stood out to me. And this one just, after looking for so long, finally when I saw this, it was like, wow, I finally got it. This is a photograph of a line for a sample sale in Soho. These are all people applying for a job. Now, weird and different images. It's just important, I think, to talk about this, because this photography is, in my opinion, done best when you shoot for yourself. You obviously want to, show the photographs to people and different people and see what they like the best, and see how they react to it. But you don't want to, shoot this work for likes, and shoot this work to sell. It's great if it does, but you want to get your vision and voice out there, and you want to shoot what's most interesting to you, while still understanding what everybody thinks about it. So, don't be afraid of taking a photograph that other people won't get. Not every photograph is meant to be shown on a wall. Some of the street photographs are, but some street photographs are, meant to be shown in books. There's a great Robert Frank, one of the best photographs in the Americans, is a photograph of someone shining someone's shoes in the middle of a line of urinals in a men's bathroom. And it's such a fascinating photograph, but definitely not a photograph I'd want to put, on my living room wall. It's maybe someone has because it's probably worth 50 grand right now for that photograph, but it's meant for in the sequence in a book. And for advanced photography and thinking, I just wanted to highlight this again. We talked about emotion and gesture, and we talked about trying to notice things with your eyes first. But when I'm standing there and I'm waiting for a photograph and I notice people, I'm looking right at their eyes. I'm just looking and I'm trying to find people. It's easier when it's an area with less people, but in a crowded area on a street corner, I'm just looking through that crowd with my eyes, not through the viewfinder, for that person who looks like they've got something going on that can be shown in the camera. So that's something really important to just try to train yourself to see that way. I think it's really going to show in your photographs if you do. Here's a panhandler asking for money. I thought this expression was just really powerful. There's like fear there. There's someone who's not used to that. There's a little bit of anger. And as I mentioned a little bit before, embracing spontaneity is incredibly important. Going with your gut. Street photography, 99 out of 100 photographs, or even 999 out of 1,000 photographs, aren't going to be amazing. Some of them, of course, be good, but maybe 1 out of 1,000 is going to be something that you use, or part of a project or something like that you do, and it's about that one photograph. It's not about the 999. You obviously don't want to shoot like crazy and just kind of go completely haphazard, because that'll kind of backfire in certain ways. But you want to embrace when you feel like in your gut something might happen. You want to go with it. You want to just be quick and fast and get the photograph and figure out later if it's good or not. There's a lot of times where you're going to do this. You're going to see a moment almost happening, and you're going to take the photograph, and you're going to come back and you're be like, why the hell did I take that photograph? That's like the most awful thing. I'm a terrible photographer. But by taking those moments, the 100 that you just tell yourself that was the stupidest thing I've ever photographed, that one incredible moment is gonna pop up in there, and it's gonna be like, holy cow! If I wasn't shooting like this, if I wasn't trying to react this way, I wouldn't have gotten that amazing photograph. And you find over time, like as you get better, you'll get ready to take a photograph, and then you pull back at the last second. You won't actually take it, because you'll see, oh, that's nothing. Whereas at first you might have just taken it, and it's good to take more at first, and then over time you'll, get comfortable when to pull back and when to take the photograph. But go with your gut. Use your gut as your guide. Here's another quick moment where they both came around the corner. Thankfully, I was, had my camera up and pre-focused. Otherwise, I would not have been able to capture this and capture the looks in their eyes and everything. It was really a split-second photograph. Now, the final thing I want to talk about is particularly, right now when this video is created, important quiet photography. Street photography can be done in suburban areas, in areas without a lot of people, just as well as it can be done in busy areas of the city, as I mentioned before. But how do you do that? It's harder. When you're in the middle of a busy Manhattan, you can blend in, not be seen, and it's really easy to do. When you're in the middle of a suburban area or an area with less people, you stand out. How do you get first of all, if you see a great person, how do you get a great photograph of them that's somewhat candid? And how do you create images that don't have people in them that, to be just as interesting? It's a lot of things to think about. But, I promise you, if you look around, the same amount of moments are there. You're going to get the same amount of interesting moments. It just takes a shift in thinking, and a shift in what you find interesting. One thing to think about is, how do you view the world and the areas that you're capturing? What do you think about these areas? Why are they interesting? What are the interesting things about them? And then thinking about that, and then trying to figure out how you can photograph that as you're walking around. These right now, what I'm doing is I'm photographing new Brooklyn project, and I'm just exploring the borough, learning the borough. Kind of, it started out close to where I live, but just going deeper and deeper. And there are a lot less people. You might go 5 or 6 or 7 blocks without seeing a single person. But you have to have your hope, like that the people shots will come, because they do come. I've gotten some of the best people shots in my life. They may not be as frequent, but they're there, and they're even more powerful because it's an environment without that many people. Portraiture is also really important. So some moments where you might not be able to get a candid photograph of someone in the right way, you can really ask someone if you can take their portrait. Here's one where, I thought these guys looked really interesting, and so I asked for a portrait. And the guy in the blue sweatshirt started to get down to like pose, and I had to say, I was like, no, just stay right, like exactly how you're looking, like just pretend I'm not here, and look like you were right before I walked in. And they gave me this, he went right back into it, and so it looks like it's a portrait, but it looks like a candid moment. You don't even know whether it's a portrait or not. It's just a natural moment either way, and that's something very important to do as well. Here's a day where, or, I'd went a week or two without capturing a good photograph of a person in these environments. It's still getting good photographs of backgrounds and things, but, saying I need some more people photographs, like I'm getting frustrated. And then all of a sudden I'm walking down a quiet street with nobody around at all, in the middle of a weekday. And, I see these kids smoking weed in the backyard of an abandoned building, and like, boom, that's awesome. So yeah, they come when they come, as I mentioned. Have faith. For anyone who is exploring Brooklyn, Greenwood Cemetery is one of the most beautiful places in the world. It's absolutely incredible and fascinating, and I suggest everyone visit at some point. In background photographs, it's giving a feel of an area. What does it feel like to be there? It's setting a stage for an overall feeling for the project. So how do you do that? You got to just really keep going and keep shooting, and keep looking for areas, and those shots will come. And finally, I've harped on this a million times. This is kind of the last thing. It's please get out there and photograph. I don't care if you do it 5 minutes every 3 days and walk 2 blocks away from your house and shoot. That's fantastic if you're doing that. Take your camera out for 10 minutes every few days, somewhere, go to the same places over and over again. Just make sure to do it. And that's going to be the biggest key towards improving your photographs and taking a lot of good photographs. You're going to notice, the more you do it, the more interesting things you're going to see over time. So sorry to repeat the idea that repetition is the most important thing, but it really is. In my area, there's some just fascinating houses with these incredible front yard displays, and you can just imagine the people that live in these places based on these quirky things. So it's something I really look forward to and look for. And photograph where you live. I've also mentioned this before, but you know that area better than you know any other place. You live there, you've been there, and I think that's the place where you have the most chance to um, explore and shoot and tell a story that could be really, really interesting. The most opportunity to get out there without really altering your life, or carving out too much time for photography particularly if you're really busy. And it becomes a great way to de-stress because you don't have to set aside a half a day. You could do it, like I know, like someone runs or going for, it's basically going for a walk. That's what I do to de-stress, to get my anxiety down. I just go for walks and I shoot. So in addition to the repetition, photographing where you live is, I think, the other or one of the other keys. Here's one that was, a candid moment, but sort of a portrait. So obvious I was taking this, and I gave her a little kind of smile and nod, and she didn't seem very perturbed by it. Now, forget everything I said. Be instinctive, be spontaneous, and have fun. You can think of everything that you're doing and screwing up when you're editing. Just go out there, shoot, and enjoy it. Enjoying it is the key. Hope you enjoyed this presentation, and happy shooting.